forget to rate our show and subscribe.
Before we begin this podcast, if you or someone you know is in crisis or needs emotional support, there are tools that can help. So get yourself a pen and paper or open a note-taking app on your phone or computer. Feel free to pause this episode while you get yourself ready. The episode starts at 1 minute and 52 seconds. You can call Talk Suicide Canada at 1-833-456-4566. You can text 45645, which is coming in the fall of 2023. In Canada, you can also call 988, the Kids Help Phone at 1-800-668-6868. The Trans Lifeline in Canada is 1-877-330-6366. And in the United States, 1-877-565-8860, or call 911. You are not alone, and you do not have to be alone. I would like to honor and recognize the traditional and unceded territories of the Katzie, Kwantlen, and Semiahmoo nations on whose territory I live, work, and play. Welcome to We Are the ADHD Family Podcast. This podcast is meant to chronicle our journey with ADHD, autism, and other discoveries along the way. I reach out to advocates, experts, individuals, and other families that want to raise their voices and empower those on their journey. My name is Mark Smeets, and I am passionate about removing barriers for others through creating connections and building on strengths and practical problem solving. I am married to Siobhan, a parent of 2 wonderful kids, and all of us have ADHD. I want you to feel like you have power and hope. And now, into the episode. Welcome to the next episode of We Are the ADHD Family. I figured it was time to get into part 2 of our origin. It's a big episode, and it's a heavy episode. I also wanted to make sure that there were a lot of practical tips that you can walk away with. And I also want to give you a super brief summary of really the reason why things took as long as they did. In essence, the pediatrician faxed over a doctor's referral to Sunny Hill. Sunny Hill never received it. There was no due diligence done on the part of the pediatrician's office or Sunny Hill until my wife and I got involved. So that began the back and forth between myself, the pediatrician, and Sunny Hill to have them fax everything over. And that is what took so long. It's weird to sum something up in less than 30 seconds, but that's what this episode is going to be about. We are not the only family in this situation. I know there's others. All you have to do is join one of the Facebook groups that are out there, and you'll meet families every single day as they post their struggles. Instead of diving into the story first, I want to start this whole episode with my closing advice. I don't want to make you wait till the end to hear this because I think and feel that it's pretty important that I state this now. And it's equally important to state that these items I'm about to read are in no particular order. The importance of them is all number 1 in my books. Number 1, document, 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 document some more, and just keep documenting. When it comes to appointments and timeframes, do the best job you can to document those things. If I had to do it all over again, or if my wife and I had to do it all over again, we'd probably get a simple old school calendar, one of those foldable ones you get at the dollar store, and put your doctor's appointments and dates in that. Using the iPhone, it's fantastic, but I have no idea how to get the old stuff out of there. This is where technology kind of sucks in that sense. If you're documenting traits and things that you see, don't change how you document it. Put it in an Excel file. It's probably the easiest way to do it. Word document. If you want to write a database, write a database. The world's your oyster as far as options for that. So there's my first piece of advice. Document it. Document your emails. Print those out. Keep those. Anytime someone says something, follow up with an email to say, here's what I take our conversation to mean, and this is what you said, this is what I said, and this is what we agreed with or not agreed with. That's the information you want to keep. Number 2, if you're on a wait list, call the destination and confirm that the referral that the office sent was actually received. If you can't reach them, because some offices are like that, then convince your doctor's office or whoever you're dealing with to call that other location and confirm with someone, a human, that it was actually received. There's a reason I'm saying this. Many offices still use fax machines. Don't just get the fax confirmation. I mean, get that part of it. That's good. But have someone on the other side actually confirm that the referral was received. A human voice. I had a friend that went through a similar situation to us, and they were missing the fax as well. They just had a shorter time frame take place than we did. Number three, if a provider you are dealing with does not want to see your information, hear your complaints, tries to brush you and your concerns off, doesn't want to see anything you've documented or anything like that, complain. And then number two, if that doesn't go in your favor, ask for a second opinion. Something not to do with them. And if that person doesn't want to see that information, get a third opinion. Don't stop until you're satisfied that you have exhausted the answers that you were wanting to get. Again, it's your gut that's telling you that this is the right path for these things. Listen to it. If someone says to you, number four, if someone says to you that they don't want to diagnose, you can't see my air quotes, X, or whatever disability it is, whether it's ADHD, Down syndrome, who knows, because there is no funding for it, lodge a complaint with the organization or go above them. If a school doesn't want to give your child a designation, go to the school district. If a doctor says they don't want to diagnose such and such, go above them to the College of Physicians or something like that. It really does suck to start an episode or something like this with talking about those four critical things. Actually, 5 things. I know you're probably tired. I know you're probably exhausted emotionally, physically, spiritually. I see your pain. My family has been through this. We get it. If you don't have a support network, build one. And that can be anything. Be gentle on yourself. You are doing the best that you can. A tiny bit of relationship advice from myself. My wife and I don't swear at each other. We're pretty respectful. We don't have big, huge arguments. Yeah, we get mad. And everybody does. You kidding? I drive her crazy. It's the little things that really count and make a difference when times are really stressed. For any partner, and I'm not going to make it too gender-based here, bring flowers, bring a card, leave a little note. In that note, say how much you appreciate what they do, how proud you are of them, how much you love them. Anything that is supportive and contributes to your relationship. Don't forget, you have a relationship with your spouse. Protect it. You are a team. You have to treat this as a team. You will come out stronger. And trust me, your kids will notice that you two are strong together. Don't compare relationships either. Your relationship will not look like our relationship. If you swear at each other, okay, that might be a thing that you guys just do. My wife and I don't. Know what is respectful for both of you. And that goes for if you're in a same-sex marriage as well. And it's time to laugh because I did forget something. Just a perspective. The reason we want to push is this is going to apply if your child is under 6 in the province of BC. Getting something like an autism diagnosis and pushing for it, that means there's funding available. And I believe it's $22,000 a year. After your child is turned 6, you are brought down to I think $6,000 a year. We went for our first initial assessment at 4 years, 8 months. And that would have landed us in the 22,000 range. Well, we're not exactly rich people here. We struggle just like you do. That's a lot of money that was left on the table as a result of that person, the way that initial diagnosis came out, but also because, we were just wiped. And if there is one regret I do have, it's that. It's not pushing hard enough for it. And maybe that's the wrong word to use, and maybe I'm just not being as kind to myself or ourselves. It was a bitter pill to swallow to know that we didn't have access to something like that we could help our son out. So just think of the money that's left on the table, and that's in itself is worth a fight. Let's dive into the story. I'm going to cast a big net for this, and basically we're going to rewind and go before Rage Night. One thing that has made this challenging, as I've mentioned on another podcast episode, was we have awesome records of all the traits and events that we've gone through with Owen. The one thing that was really hard to figure out were the doctor's appointment dates and where we could find half that stuff. A lot of it's in, iPhone calendars and all that, but how to look that stuff up in the past, I have no idea. Couldn't even tell you. But that has made tracking certain appointments and milestones a little bit on the tricky side. So I could tell you the date and time that he ate black beans out of the chili, which is kind of a foodie miracle there for us. But can I remember the exact date we met our pediatrician and all that? No, I can't. Again, we'll go with broad strokes, and any years or months, we're going to use those as just general reference guides. And as I tell this story, the one thing I want you to keep in mind is that, again, my wife and I didn't know anything about this. We didn't understand dysregulation. We didn't understand the meltdowns. We didn't understand why he was lining up objects, the aggression, the violence, the transitions. We got none of that. No one came along and said, this is what's going on. We figured it out the absolute hardest way that was probably possible. And that made for a very stressful, emotionally challenging time. And I promise one final thing before jumping into all this. As hard as things were, there were a lot of really, really good times. And I want to save that for an episode because it really did change the way that we parent and we look at things. And I know I look at things, I'm just speaking for me, pretty awesome. Just some of the positive things that we've experienced with O, and why we love him so much and why we fight so hard for him. At the end of this episode, I'm going to take the points that I mentioned a minute ago, and I'm going to put those at the end. That's what I want you to walk away with after listening to this story. Just talking briefly about Owen's life in the beginning, we knew something was odd and out of place. The process of conceiving Owen and having him born was really tough. We nearly lost him twice. Again, it's another episode. And when he was born, we were happy. It was pretty amazing. Here's our son. This is great. We noticed things were odd when we couldn't put him down after Siobhan had breastfed him. And I know some people will say, oh, you just have to put him down and walk away. Well, yeah, he never stopped crying. It's like he could not be away from Siobhan. Let's not get into separation anxiety. Let's not try and figure it out. It was just something wasn't right. And I can't tell you the number of times that I wish, as a man, I had boobs and could produce milk, so I could take the pressure off of my wife, who was sitting in a rocking chair all night with our son. We couldn't put him down, so they'd pass out in the rocking chair together. For me being the way that I am, and sort of the guy that always wants to do something, I couldn't do anything. I felt completely helpless. So did Siobhan, for that matter. Sure, nurturing our son, but she couldn't get a break either. Other things began to happen as Owen grew. Things like this is when we began to see the odd behavior, lining things up, the head shakes, tippy-toe walking, sleep. Again, another completely different episode. Just the typical things that you begin to see with autistic kids kick in. When Owen was around 3 or 4, and I can't remember the age that this started at, we were seeing a speech pathologist who was awesome. She had a fantastic connection with O. One thing that we loved is that Owen didn't hide from her. He loved playing. He was very comfortable with her. She was comfortable with him. She was the one who told us that she started noticing the traits. Being behind in speech wasn't one of those signs. It was a part of it, but there was more. I even have a recording of the assessment so I could refer to it back. And I'm glad that I have that because it helped me down the road. With our struggles that we were having and our lack of knowledge, all these little pieces that seemed out of place, when she suggested that he was on the spectrum and we started doing research, things started to fit into place. We eventually went to find a pediatrician, and when we did, of course, you need a doctor's referral. I had known my family doctor since I was about 5 or 6 years old, and I trusted him. But there was a problem. He didn't see the problem. I remember that there was one time we took Owen for a doctor's visit, and it was after we had the speech report. We brought this to his attention, and when we were going to leave, when it was all done, the appointment itself, it was an epic meltdown. He screamed his head off, and as we tried to get out the door, he was actually holding on to the door frame of not wanting to leave. And then he put himself on the ground and was kicking and screaming in the office. Yeah, it felt pretty bad at that point. And our doctor just chalked it up to a tantrum. We didn't understand transitions at this point, obviously. And if I remember correctly, when we got down to the car, where I parked, there is a sidewalk, and Owen was just pacing up and down the sidewalk and refused to get in the car. If you're thinking, hey, why don't you just pick him up and strap him into his car seat? That's not the kindest way to treat a child, to be honest. I think the only way we got him into the car was by saying we were going to go for McDonald's. The entire reason we went into that initial doctor's appointment was to talk about the speech results and some of the concerns. But again, we didn't feel that supported. We did find a pediatrician, and I remember calling our doctor's secretary, who I had a pretty good relationship with, and I asked her, could you please send over the referral to the pediatrician? I didn't want to have a discussion with my doctor about it. I just knew it was the right thing to do and just to get it done. And that's exactly what happened. I believe we waited about a year to get into our pediatrician's office. Our first meeting, if I remember correctly, was just my wife and I. We didn't have any of the kids there. I'm pretty sure Mackenzie wasn't born yet. She gave us some forms to fill out, authors and books to read and look at, and that's exactly what we did. We just added all that more research to our list to keep educating ourselves. When we brought Owen in to see her on the second visit, he didn't hide anything at all, which was wonderful. When we entered the office and we went into the doctor's room, wasn't exactly a big room. I remember the first thing he did was to hide in the back corner of the room behind the chairs, behind Siobhan, and he was scared. He didn't want to come out. Eventually, he did come out. Can't remember how he did it, but he began to rearrange and line up all the chairs that we were sitting in. And the three of us, myself, my wife, and the pediatrician, we watched as he did this. And my wife and I are just looking at each other, just going, see? It was nice to have our pediatrician witness this. Because, again, we had no idea what the hell was going on. And quite honestly, neither did she. And it was a wonderful moment because probably for the first time, I think my wife and I both felt validated and we felt seen, that there was something more going on. Siobhan and I found a clinic that did diagnoses right by our home. And so we had the referral put in, and I believe we waited about 6 months to actually get into the appointment. And the appointment date, and I know this for a fact, was October of 2018. As usual with these things, there's more forms to fill out, and we already had the speech report done, but we gave our forms to our daycare, and they had plenty of time to fill them out. And we were reassured that everything would be filled out. Daycare didn't fill out the forms until the very last minute. The site director had asked the staff to watch for things, but the staff members were basically saying, we don't have time. There aren't enough of us. We have to keep an eye on the kids. There's no time to fill in paperwork. And this is what I was told directly. She essentially put down that everything was quote unquote fine, partly because Owen wasn't violent and there wasn't any fighting happening or something like that. It's not that he was an angry kid that came to daycare and he was beating kids up. It wasn't like that. He was a child that learned how to mask, and unless you knew what to look for, the subtleties, like if I looked now at, and this was somebody else's child in that same state, I would have a better chance of picking these things out. But it was really annoying when daycare essentially shirked the responsibility to do this, because that could have been the end of this story, and it wasn't. One thing I wish I had done was to print out all the emails and brought that documentation with me. At this point, again, if I remember correctly, we were already emailing daycare when Owen would have a rough night, rough morning, and would say, hey, heads up, he's coming in, he's really upset. Do what you can to calm him down and so forth. I would love to have printed those things and brought them with me as something physical to present. Not just as a anecdotal story to make it seem like that, we were hysterical parents, but it gives you something physical and tangible to hand over. Eventually we got the forms. They were filled out, and we went to the meeting. I remember the car ride over to the clinic because the clinic's it's a 5-minute car ride, depending on traffic. It was that close to the house. And honestly, we thought we won the lottery because we didn't have to go very far. I remember feeling cautiously optimistic that things were going to work out. We knew that there was all this funding available. Our hopes were up. The name of the place that we chose was called Able, and it received awesome reviews on Facebook, and lots of parents had good experiences. There's a whole bunch of different locations and a whole bunch of different people that work there. So there's no point me bringing up this doctor's name. I'm sure this clinic has got good people working for them. As optimistic as we were feeling, we were both nervous. And we went in, had our meeting, and explained how things were supposed to go. 2-hour interview, we'll observe the child, we'll do some games and play some tests. And because Owen was only 4 years old, it's not like we could leave him with her. Legally, you have to be in the room. The first part of an assessment like this is to do the parent interview. So the doctor will ask you what your concerns are, what questions do you have, what's the reason for the visit. And if you've never done the assessment before, you'll get asked questions that are basically out of the diagnostic manual, the DSM. What repetitive actions do you see? What's the rigid behavior? Things of that nature. Typically, they're long conversations. They're not short. Far from it. There are a lot of things that my wife and I said, yes, we've seen this. Yes, we've seen that. There were also a lot of things that, looking back now, we didn't realize that was a thing. And I'm struggling to find an example of that. But you don't know what you don't know a lot of the times. And until you've committed the diagnostic manual to memory, how are you supposed to know? That's what, these medical professionals are for. When it came time to do Owen's visit and his part of the assessment, I was with him, Siobhan was at work, and he didn't hide anything that day. So just like the pediatrician's office where he rearranged all the chairs, he couldn't move this furniture, but he was running. The room isn't that big of a room, but there was a couch, a love seat, some toys, the doctor's desk and stuff, and he would just jump on the couch, jump on the love seat, go upside down on the love seat, upside down on the couch, and he just ran around the room. And that was what we were watching. Every single time the doctor would call him over, like to say, hey, let's work on this. He would stop, come over, do whatever the task was, and then he'd go back to running. Now, at this point, I'm laughing because I'm laughing inside. And the reason I'm laughing inside is because, again, someone is seeing what we're going through and how you couldn't really get him to stop running or anything like that, or climbing on the furniture or something of that nature. It wasn't going to happen. And I feel like it's important to point out that I wasn't going to stop him either. For the final interview, I said, I have videos on this USB that I'd like you to take a look at. I proceeded to give her the USB, and then she turned around to me and said, no, that's okay. I don't need that. I said, no, I really want you to look at this. And then she said, but then I'd have to bill you for the extra time, and I understand money's tight. And I said, I don't care. That part doesn't matter to me. We want this done right the first time. And so she says, if I have time, I'll take a look at it. Okay, fine. I thought she was going to look at it. We finish off the final meeting, and then we had to wait about 2 weeks for the final report. When my wife and I returned for the final report, doctor we saw came out and said, well, I don't support the findings of autism, but I, without question, support ADHD. She went on to explain about ADHD and how the two can look the same, or similar rather, but both my wife and I were just stunned. I remember specifically feeling like my stomach just dropped. I asked her if she had looked at the videos that I had given her, and she said no. And that she didn't have time. In addition to the whole stomach dropping feeling, it also felt like the wind had just been taken out of our sails. We were exhausted. We were tired, emotionally, physically, spiritually drained. And we just wanted help. That's all we wanted. We knew there was no funding for ADHD. We also knew absolutely nothing about ADHD, other than probably a lot of the stereotypes that persist that are out there that are just wrong. And we left that appointment feeling defeated, and we didn't know what to do next. I remember we told our pediatrician, and she was shocked. At the end of the meeting, the doctor basically said to us, why don't you come in for counseling sessions and you can tell us what you need. We just told you what we needed. It was it was tone deaf to hear that. But to be told that after all those examples, yeah, I was pretty choked. Eventually, when we got the report, she described Owen as a quote-unquote unique little boy. Dear God, unique is not quantifiable, for the love of Peter. Reading that just sent me over the edge. It did. And I think that was the time when I just felt like maybe the world was sort of against us. Looking back on it now, she was looking for the stereotypical things. Hand flapping, tippy-toe walking, all the time. Not taking into consideration masking. I remember one specific example where Owen was supposed to put together some sort of a toy set of some kind. The task basically was, as he was running around the office, to come over, do the task, and then that was basically it, just guiding through the task. She said that if he was on the spectrum, he'd never be able to, number one, do the task, and number two, never be able to focus on it long enough to complete what he completed. Someone obviously doesn't know what to look for in an autistic child. Part of the problem was we may have put too much faith in this person. We had no way of knowing it was misplaced. We just didn't. We went to see our pediatrician shortly after, and as I mentioned before, she was in shock. It was shortly after that time of getting the ADHD diagnosis because that was October of 2018, and that night happened in, well, you heard the other episode. It was basically all of December and, part of November, December into January. And I remember emailing our pediatrician saying what had happened. And that's when we started talking about supports like going to Child Youth Family Services, I think that's what it was called, or the MCFD, the Ministry for Children Family Development. Again, bringing your child up to the ministry because they've been violent, it's an incredibly scary thing because, again, we have no idea if our child's going to be taken away or not. We didn't know what to do. We did go to the MCFD, and any sort of resource that they had was, I can't remember if I said this in the other podcast or not, but it was it was like a year and a half waiting list. You want to get into art therapy? Nope, year and a half. You're left really with no options at all. After the Rage Night episode, I believe our pediatrician put the referral into Sunny Hill, which is over at BC Children's Hospital. She wasn't willing to accept it, which made us feel really good. She just felt like there had to be more to the story than what she had seen and what we had told her about. And that was great. The referral was put in. Honestly, I didn't think anything of it. I know Siobhan didn't either. We went home and we were just trying to work on with our life because we were waiting for a phone call for an appointment date on yet another leg of the journey. I believe about a year and a half went by. I found it odd, and so did my wife, that we hadn't heard anything from them. We knew there was a 2-year wait. That's been a long time. That's been that way for a long time. But we thought, we should have heard something by now. So I called the main number. I got through to someone who I guess receives the faxes. And she confirmed that there was no fax received for Owen. At the time, I just felt indifferent. Siobhan and I, we were learning, we were having some successes, we were getting better at what we were doing. We also still didn't understand what we were up against. So I went back to our pediatrician and I said, hey, I called Sunny Hill and they haven't received anything. Can you look into it on your end? Pediatrician looks into it. They apologize. We don't know what happened. We'll send it over again. Great. No problem. Totally understand. Mistakes happen. There's nothing we can do but this point and just wait. This time I let things go about maybe 8 months, give or take. I thought if it's a 2-year wait list, it's going to take a while, but let's call them back. Hey, did you get the fax that our pediatrician sent over? Nothing. Nothing received again. Now something was weird. It's been at least 2 years since this first initial request of sending over this fax for this referral. Pediatrician apologizes again. We'll look into it. In the meantime, let's also put a request in for the ADHD clinic at BC Children's, which is what we did. And they confirmed they received it. And so I also, again, assumed that, hey, they've got this one. Sunny Hill should have theirs. We should be fine. Everything's good. We heard back from the ADHD department, still a few months later, but relatively faster than everything else we'd experienced so far. So you thought, hey, everything should be okay. We went through the ADHD clinic, and it was very interesting. Little did we know that one of the doctor that we had, this is a tiny bit weird for me because he taught me a lot. And it was around that time I came across people like Dr. Russell Barkley. Going through that video of his, which I think was 30 Things Parents with ADHD Children Should Know, was pretty mind-blowing for me to sit there and see someone explain the brain, how he did, and how it affects somebody. And so this doctor and we had long conversations, and then I told him what had happened at Able, and I said, look, we still think Owen's on the spectrum. He did some work on the Sunny Hill side as well, but he goes, I don't see any autism concerns. Okay, well, that's another doctor. Maybe Siobhan and I are wrong. Turns out that this doctor also didn't have the best reputation. I found this out just recently. There were cases that should be fairly obvious that he had missed, and this is what I'm reading through from Facebook groups. So I shouldn't be too shocked that, something that we're doing over Zoom over the pandemic was missed. And I guess just a brief sidebar, I find it disturbing that a hospital has doctors that are practicing that aren't good, that there are complaints against, or rather that the mechanism to put complaints forward is not well known or publicized. I have talked to so many parents who have had certain doctors at BC Children's where they've wanted a second opinion. They didn't agree with what had happened. Just recently, I was talking to a mom where the doctor was supposed to spend 2 hours with the kid and all that. Unfortunately, they only spent about 25 minutes. What recourse does that person have? Anyhow, while we were at Sunny Hill, we also had an opportunity to talk to an occupational therapist, get some feedback, ideas, things of that nature. We had talked to her for a few months, and then eventually we had an in-person meeting in October of 2021. And the pandemic was still technically on at this point. So Owen and I headed down to the hospital. We did our meeting, and I didn't fully know what we were going to do. It was interesting. She had him do a series of physical tests, things like throwing the ball, walking one foot in front of the other, working on gross motor skills, but then also the fine motor skills. And I remember Owen struggling with having to pick up these small objects. And by the time the appointment was done, she said, oh, your son has DCD as well. DCD is a developmental coordination disorder, and if I understand correctly, it's also known as dyspraxia. It basically means, in his case, it takes 2 or 3 times as long for him to put together an action that would take a normal person without any issues a fraction of that time. And this got me thinking about, his time back in Ninja, years ago. He was trying so hard to climb up to the ring, to climb up the obstacles, to use the rings, use the lache bar, to get his body to do what he wanted it to do. And he struggled with that. Meanwhile, all these other kids that don't have these issues are pulling this off, after a couple attempts, and it takes him, a couple weeks. And like I've pointed out before in other podcasts, he just doesn't give up. Anyways, I can't remember if I called my wife or texted my wife, but I said to her, hey honey, guess what? We've got another acronym. But it was frustrating because we suspected autism, this whole entire time. It's in the back of our minds, or rather kind of in the middle of our minds, not so much on the forefront. And remember when we told our pediatrician, I'm not going to repeat her words, but in order to certify the DCD, the OT said that she couldn't do it. Pediatrician had to be the one to do it. We told our pediatrician what the OT had said, and that's when she was just like, how many hoops does this family have to jump through to get answers instead of just being passed down back and forth? That's how we ended up with the DCD designation. But honestly, it's par for the course at this point. Because, brief sidebar, we were also thinking about dyslexia. We weren't fully convinced yet. We are now. But all these things that just keep coming up. Same with his eating and wondering about an eating disorder known as ARFID. That is something that I was looking into as well. We completed our stint at the ADHD clinic. Again, still hadn't heard anything from Sunny Hill. So I decided to call Sunny Hill again. And, hey, did you get anything? Have you got the referral? Nothing. There is one thing I did forget to mention. When I was speaking to the intake person, the one thing she had said to me, which I thought was just bizarre, was that her most common complaint is that she hears all the time from parents where the doctor's office never faxed over a referral. And yes, I said fax. I just thought it was weird that she kept bringing that up. Other things that this person brought up, she kept on pitting the blame to the doctor's office. Nothing on them, of course, because why would that party accept blame? I went and called back our pediatrician. Actually, it might have been an email. And I said, look, this is still not there. And I decided to handle this like I do one of my logistics loads, where I essentially babysit it every step of the way. And I began to call Sunny Hill like every day or every other day. Did you get it yet? Did you get it yet? Did you get it yet? It was also very hard to reach the pediatrician's office. So aside from following up with emails, I couldn't really reach anybody on the phone. And it's not uncommon for pediatricians to go through that either, where they're only there certain hours a day. I kept bugging Sunny Hill, and I remember at one point I did, quote unquote, lose it. I got really mad, just saying, how can you guys lose this? It's like the third time. Eventually I made it through to somebody else in that department. It wasn't the intake person. And she said to me, she was really nice. Oh, you're Owen's dad. We've been waiting for this paperwork for quite a while. I know who you are. And I was just like, what? Okay. So I had pictures and notes and stuff on my mirror, which my mirror was acted as my whiteboard. It was quite an interesting revelation to hear this. That clerk that I had been talking to, I guess had mentioned it to this other staff person, and she had a little sticky note on her monitor with Owen's name to look for it and watch for it. And it had my phone number on there too. I guess I must have called so much that instead of hearing from them saying, we understand your concern, we're looking for it, we'll reach out to the pediatrician or something like that, somebody was smart enough to make a note of it and take it upon themselves to keep an eye out. And it just so happens that's who I reached that day. And that was a really, really good feeling. It really was. We finally got the phone call that the paperwork had been received. Myself, Siobhan, Owen, and Mackenzie were at the Lego store in the mall, and there is no cell service. This was just prior to Christmas, if I remember correctly. And there is no cell service in this part of the mall. It's in a weird spot. It's a dead spot. You're stuck in the Lego store. My phone rang, and it was Sunny Hill, and they confirmed that they got it. I believe I was on the ground on my knees because I was just floored. After all this time, all this effort, finally, they got it. If you're thinking that this is the end, no, it's not. Maybe time to take a pee break, everybody. I don't know what I was expecting or what Siobhan was expecting at the time, but during the course of the conversations with various staff members, they were basically saying, look, we know we know there's been a mistake made somewhere. We really don't know on whose end it is, and we can backdate these things, but it's up to the clinician to do it. all right, sweet, backdate us. It's been like, how many years at this point? The most they were willing to backdate us was 1 year. I tried pushing for more, and the same lady I told you about earlier that was doing the intakes, she basically said, I suggest you accept it and don't argue about it. And so that was pretty, if it made you mad hearing that, yeah, it made me mad too. And so we did wait. Our relationship with Owen was getting better. Siobhan and I had learned so much in the years that we'd been doing all this research on our own. And we just continued to go on with things. And at some point, I basically said, I think it might have been when Owen was 3, I want to treat every child as if they're autistic. And I didn't mean that in the way of stereotypical what have you. I meant this in the way of I want to treat every child with kindness. That was a game changer for us. Credit goes to my wife for pointing out the things that I was doing wrong. And I'm really glad she did, because I was able to see where I was at fault. Because again, when your child is dysregulated, it isn't your child. It could be anything and everything that's going on. You are a part of that equation. So I'm forever grateful for my wife for saying those kind of things to me. Eventually we got another phone call, and it was like the next stage of the intake process. And they were going to send us a whole bunch of information. We still didn't have an appointment date yet, but we had all these forms to fill out. Yay, more forms! And that's exactly what we did. We gave the school a whole bunch of stuff. Owen was in grade 2. We had an awesome conversation with this teacher, who is a family friend, and we are forever indebted to her because she saw what we saw. She also had experience with spotting autism in her students, and she's just a rock star. Really, she is. So we went and filled out all this paperwork, and I'm sitting there. There was a funny moment between Siobhan and I when we're looking at one of these big binders of all this stuff that we have. And I thought to myself, I'm going to digitize all this, and I'm going to add it to a PDF and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, good try, Mark. Good try. But the idea of looking at that big, huge, whatever the big size binders are, I don't know if it's 8-inch or 9-inch ring ones, that was way too much. And this had all our forms, everything we filled out over the years, every survey we filled out for Owen. Anytime a doctor asks us to fill out a form, I have no idea how many copies of the scared tests there are in there. There was a lot. So when Sunny Hill asked us to fax over information, began to laugh. Because I'm like, how am I going to get all this stuff in there? And Siobhan and I took not that there was any rush to it, because hey, it's a 2-year wait. In the end, we faxed about 80 pages over, which honestly I get a kick out of. I really do. At one point, I called that same intake person back, and I said, look, this is too much to fax over. I just want to bring this down, or send a courier with it. You can just return it back. And she's like, no, the fax machine will be fine. We'll make sure there's lots of paper in it, blah, blah, blah. All right, sure, whatever. For fear of dating this, but what the hey, the year is 2023. And we're still using fax machines, ladies and gentlemen. This stuff should be electronic. We can move mountains of freight in big giant trucks. We have a space station floating around planet Earth. There are multiple rovers on the planet of Mars. We put human beings on the moon in 1969. We have probes around Saturn. We sent a probe all the way past Pluto. And we've got the pictures to prove it. In 1996, we elected the first Indo-Canadian premier of BC. And in the past couple hundred years that music has been around, in the past 15, if I remember correctly, Joe Satriani and Steve Vai, 2 of my favorite guitar players, if you don't know who they are, invented 2 brand new scales. They're smarter than Beethoven or Mozart. I'm beginning to have too much fun with these examples, honestly. But we can't digitize a doctor's referral to an office without figuring out how to protect privacy. It is not that complicated. And I don't mean to be an armchair quarterback, because I'm sure there's always a level of complexity to these things. I really would love to see government ministries pull their heads out of their you-know-whats and piece this together so families like mine don't have to go through this. Or to be told by some clerk at a hospital that this is common practice for doctors not to check on things, and she gets lots of angry calls. Like, holy cow. Anyhow, I'm getting away from the story. It is really hard not to interject these things, and that's why I try to say sidebar or what have you. I know you're thinking it. We went through it. We thought the exact same thing. Keep in mind that we have not talked about anything that has happened at school or at home. I have said things were getting better, and that is true, but there were still struggles. Grade 2 was an absolutely brutal year for Owen. The bullying that he faced, punched in the nose by that girl that made his nose bleed, it was a bad year. So let's fast forward to all this, and our expected date for a appointment was December of 2022. And basically we were told that it was a moving target because they have to finish with other clients that they have, and it may or may not be that date. I made another phone call just after the new year, I think it was February, just to see if anything had changed. And they're saying, oh, now it was summer of 2023. It's pushed back again. I think it was pushed back in total about, I think it was 2 or 3 times. And then out of the blue, that date in March of whatever it was that I recorded that episode is when we got the phone call to say your appointment's April 11th. I think the rest you pretty much know. That was a pretty stunning moment, to be honest. I don't even know why I picked up my phone, but I just did because it was from a blocked number. And I normally don't, because who doesn't get spam calls? And if you're wondering what my wife and I were doing when we got the phone call, we happened to both be home and we were just swapping a load of laundry out of the dryer. I just randomly picked up my phone. It was a very happy moment. We were really shocked. Really, really shocked. And I'm not going to lie, we had to take a day. We had to take a day and process everything because of the whole journey. I mean, at this point, even though the Sunny Hill process really took 4 years, from the time of Owen's original diagnosis through Able, it's been 5 years because he's 9 now. It sucks because, again, we could have had access to that 22,000 years ago when he was 4. He could have had help. We could have had services. He may not be behind in things. It's really frustrating. It's really, really, really frustrating. There is a school component I'm going to talk about a little later, but not in this episode. Advocating wasn't something that happened on purpose. Wasn't like that. We just had to keep fighting for him for every little thing, every time he struggled with something. We are really grateful that we have had 4 absolutely wonderful teachers who I think are just complete angels. We can't thank you enough for the support. And we've told them how much it meant to us. And they've known our journey. And everything that we've tried to do with any of this has been with as much kindness as possibly could ever be done with. You can go in all guns blazing, force your way into things and demand things and all that. That isn't going to get you what you need. Not all the time. And it's certainly not going to change the system either. Certainly if you do the, scorched earth approach, you're going to burn bridges as a result. I know we're frustrated. But the people that we interact with and that we talk to, this is not a situation of their making. I'd rather put my head on the pillow each night before I go to bed and close my eyes, knowing that I treated somebody with kindness and I did my best to help uplift and change a situation that way. Next week, because it is now June 13th, Tuesday. We have another appointment at Sunny Hill to do the second part of the assessment. It's with a speech pathologist. I'm actually really excited for this. The struggles that we go through to ask Owen what he wants to eat or how he's feeling inside, this pathologist has got I think it's like a master's in communication. Like it's his specialty of specialties. And I'm really curious, both Siobhan and I are really curious to know what more is going to come out of this. And it feels really good to know that we have that big giant spreadsheet. We're armed with all this knowledge and information. And I am very comfortable at this point being able to push back and ask questions and clarify. And the only reason is because what this whole experience has taught myself, my wife, is we need a framework. Parents need a framework. You can't just trust the doctor anymore. You need to be as educated about these things as they are. We don't have time to go to medical school. We're the ones trying to help our kids, advocate for our kids. We have to be educated as well. So I'm really curious to know if there's going to be some sort of communication diagnosis that comes out of this, and it explains why some things are just harder for him to tell us, whether it's when he's hungry, how he's feeling. One thing that was a big challenge to do recording this was not to attack doctors, teachers, government. Believe me, I have things I want to say. I've only tried to record this part a whole bunch of times, but it detracts from the story. It detracts from our experience, and I think saving that for a different episode is certainly the appropriate thing to do. I'd also rather see change through conversation. If I can reach out to those advocates that make a difference in the system, if I can reach out to government leaders and talk to them, including those that I disagree with and dislike, anything to help further the conversation of wanting to see this change. And I guess there's more to it behind just wanting to see the change within the system itself. The other aspect is, look at all the stigmas that are around us. People with ADHD are dumb and lazy. People with autism flap their hands and tippy-toe walk or whatever. People with disabilities are useless or cast aside. And nothing could be further from the truth. We need people to pay attention. We can either be a jerk about it or we can be nice. And right now, what I see in the world, nice is in short supply. And if you're wondering how the relationship is with the pediatrician, it's fine. Were we angry? Yeah, we were. I'm not going to lie. But it is in the past. I can't change it. And I'm glad that we've stuck with her because she believed us. And that says a lot when a lot of people didn't want to believe us. So let's wrap up this episode with the 4 points that I talked about in the very beginning. Number 1, document, 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 document some more, and just keep documenting. When it comes to appointments and timeframes, do the best job you can to document those things. If I had to do it all over again, or if my wife and I had to do it all over again, we'd probably get a simple old school calendar, one of those foldable ones you get at the dollar store, and put your doctor's appointments and dates in that. Using the iPhone, it's fantastic, but I have no idea how to get the old stuff out of there. This is where technology kind of sucks in that sense. If you're documenting traits and things that you see, don't change how you document it. Put it in an Excel file. It's probably the easiest way to do it. Word document. If you want to write a database, write a database. The world's your oyster as far as options for that. So there's my first piece of advice. Document it. Document your emails. Print those out. Keep those. Anytime someone says something, follow up with an email to say, here's what I take our conversation to mean, and this is what you said, this is what I said, and this is what we agreed with or not agreed with. That's the information you want to keep. Number 2, if you're on a wait list, call the destination and confirm that the referral that the office sent was actually received. If you can't reach them, because some offices are like that, then convince your doctor's office or whoever you're dealing with to call that other location and confirm with someone, a human, that it was actually received. There's a reason I'm saying this. Many offices still use fax machines. Don't just get the fax confirmation. I mean, get that part of it. That's good. But have someone on the other side actually confirm that the referral was received, a human voice. I had a friend that went through a similar situation to us, and they were missing the fax as well. They just had a shorter time frame take place than we did. Number three, if a provider you are dealing with does not want to see your information, hear your complaints, tries to brush you and your concerns off, doesn't want to see anything you've documented or anything like that, complain. And then number 2, if that doesn't go in your favor, ask for a second opinion, something not to do with them. And if that person doesn't want to see that information, get a third opinion. Don't stop until you're satisfied that you have exhausted the answers that you were wanting to get. Again, it's your gut that's telling you that this is the right path for these things. Listen to it. If someone says to you, number 4, if someone says to you that they don't want to diagnose, you can't see my air quotes, X, or whatever disability it is, whether it's ADHD, Down syndrome, who knows, because there is no funding for it, lodge a complaint with the organization or go above them. If a school doesn't want to give your child a designation, go to the school district. If a doctor says they don't want to diagnose such and such, go above them to the College of Physicians or something like that. It really does suck to start an episode or something like this with talking about those 4 critical things. Actually, 5 things. I know you're probably tired. I know you're probably exhausted emotionally, physically, spiritually. I see your pain. My family has been through this. We get it. If you don't have a support network, build one. And that can be anything. Be gentle on yourself. You are doing the best that you can. A tiny bit of relationship advice from myself. My wife and I don't swear at each other. We're pretty respectful. We don't have big, huge arguments. Yeah, we get mad. Everybody does. You kidding? I drive her crazy. It's the little things that really count and make a difference when times are really stressed. For any partner, I'm not going to make it too gender-based here, bring flowers, bring a card, leave a little note. In that note, say how much you appreciate what they do, how proud you are of them, how much you love them. Anything that is supportive and contributes to your relationship. Don't forget, you have a relationship with your spouse. Protect it. You are a team. You have to treat this as a team. You will come out stronger. And trust me, your kids will notice that you two are strong together. Don't compare relationships either. Your relationship will not look like our relationship. If you swear at each other, okay, that might be a thing that you guys just do. My wife and I don't. Know what is respectful for both of you. And that goes for if you're in a same-sex marriage as well. And it's time to laugh because I did forget something. Just a perspective. The reason we want to push is this is going to apply if your child is under 6 in the province of BC. getting something like an autism diagnosis and pushing for it, that means there's funding available. And I believe it's $22,000 a year. After your child is turned 6, you are brought down to, I think, $6,000 a year. We went for our first initial assessment at 4 years, 8 months. And that would have landed us in the 22,000 range. Well, we're not exactly rich people here. We struggle just like you do. That's a lot of money that was left on the table as a result of that person, that initial the way that initial diagnosis came out, but also because, we were just wiped. And if there is one regret I do have, it's that. It's not pushing hard enough for it. And maybe that's the wrong word to use, and maybe I'm just not being as kind to myself or ourselves. It was a bitter pill to swallow to know that we didn't have access to something like that we could help our son out. So just think of the money that's left on the table, and that's in itself is worth a fight. Let's dive into the story. I'm going to cast a big net for this, and basically we're going to rewind and go before Rage Night. One thing that has made this challenging, as I've mentioned on another podcast episode, was we have awesome records of all the traits and events that we've gone through with Owen. The one thing that was really hard to figure out were the doctor's appointment dates and where we could find half that stuff. A lot of it's in, iPhone calendars and all that, but how to look that stuff up in the past, I have no idea. Couldn't even tell you. But that has made tracking certain appointments and milestones a little bit on the tricky side. So I could tell you the date and time that he ate black beans out of the chili, which is a kind of a foodie miracle there for us. But can I remember the exact date we met our pediatrician and all that? No, I can't. Again, we'll go with broad strokes, and any years or months, we're going to use those as just general reference guides. And as I tell this story, the one thing I want you to keep in mind is that, again, my wife and I didn't know anything about this. We didn't understand dysregulation. We didn't understand the meltdowns. We didn't understand why he was lining up objects, the aggression, the violence, the transitions. We got none of that. No one came along and said, this is what's going on. We figured it out the absolute hardest way that was probably possible. And that made for a very stressful, emotionally challenging time. And I promise one final thing before jumping into all this. As hard as things were, there were a lot of really, really good times. And I want to save that for an episode because it really did change the way that we parent and we look at things. And I know I look at things, I'm just speaking for me. Pretty awesome. Just some of the positive things that we've experienced with O, and why we love him so much and why we fight so hard for him.
Thank you for listening to our show.
How many bookmarks do you have in your web browser that you say, hey, I'm going to check that out later, but you still haven't done it? And they've been there for at least a year or longer. If you're hearing this message, you've reached the end of the episode, and for that, I want to say thank you. I hope you have enjoyed what you've heard and are walking away with newfound knowledge.
We are the ADHD family.
See you soon for a new episode. I have 3 things to ask of you. Number 1, if you have any comments, questions, or guest ideas, please leave a comment on the Facebook page. Number 2, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It helps people find us. And number 3, if you want to be a guest on the show or know someone who would make a great guest, contact me through our Facebook page. This podcast is open to everyone. You don't need to be an expert, just passionate and want to see change. The opinions expressed by the host and guest are not associated with any employer or organization unless otherwise stated. Any medical information on this site and podcast is provided as an information resource only and is not to be used or relied on for any diagnostic or treatment purposes. This information does not create any patient-physician relationship and should not be used as a substitute for a professional diagnosis and treatment. Please consult your healthcare provider before making any healthcare decisions or guidance about a specific medical condition. The show, host, and its guests expressly disclaim responsibility and shall have no liability for any damages, loss, injury, or liability whatsoever suffered as a result of your reliance on the information contained in this site or show. By visiting this site and listening to this show, you agree to the terms and conditions, which may from time to time change or be supplemented by the show host.